Imagine you're living on an island. One morning you look outside and you see a pig eating your potatoes. So you grab your gun and shoot it. Sounds like a normal farm dispute, right? Except the pig belongs to the British. You're American, and the island you're standing on is claimed by both countries. A few weeks later, American soldiers arrive. Then British warships arrive. Then more soldiers arrive. Cannons are pointed at each other. And suddenly, America and Britain are almost at war over a pig. And the strangest part? The pig was the only casualty. This is the story of the Pig War of 1859. To understand how a pig could almost cause an international war, we have to go back a little. The island was San Juan Island, located in what is now Washington State. But in the 1800s, the United States and Great Britain were still arguing over exactly where their border should be. In 1846, the two countries signed the Oregon Treaty. The treaty established much of the boundary between British territory and the United States. But there was a problem. The treaty said the border should follow the middle of a channel separating the mainland from Vancouver Island. Sounds simple, except there were two possible channels. One route favored the Americans, another route favored the British, and right in between them were the San Juan Islands. So both countries basically looked at the islands and said, "Those are ours." By the 1850s, the British Hudson's Bay Company had established a large sheep farm on San Juan Island. American settlers were arriving too. And now you had British and American settlers living on the same island. While their governments disagreed about who actually owned it, tensions were already building. And then a pig showed up. On June 15th, 1859, an American settler named Lyman Cutler discovered a pig digging around in his potato garden. And this wasn't the first time. The pig belonged to Charles Griffin, a manager working for the Hudson's Bay Company. Griffin had several pigs roaming around the area. Cutler was apparently tired of watching them destroy his crops. So when he found one of Griffin's pigs in his garden, he shot it. Bang. The pig was dead, and Cutler's problem seemed pretty simple. The pig had eaten his potatoes. But then Griffin found out. He wanted compensation for the animal. Cutler reportedly refused. And things escalated. British authorities threatened to arrest Cutler and remove American settlers from the island because they considered them trespassers. Now remember, this wasn't just a disagreement between two farmers. The island was already at the center of a dispute between two countries. So the American settlers became worried. They asked the U.S. military for protection, and the U.S. military responded. In July 1859, U.S. Army Captain George Pickett arrived on San Juan Island with American soldiers. At first, there were only 64 men, but their presence sent a very clear message. America wasn't going to let the British simply remove its settlers. The British weren't happy, so British authorities sent warships. One of them was the HMS Tribune, a Royal Navy steam frigate carrying dozens of guns. Then more British warships arrived, and suddenly, the situation looked very different. On one side, American soldiers. On the other, British soldiers and heavily armed warships. And all of this started because a pig ate some potatoes, but now nobody wanted to back down. The situation kept getting more serious. More American soldiers arrived. Eventually, hundreds of American troops were on the island. They began building defensive positions and placing artillery. The British also had enormous firepower. At one point, several British warships were positioned nearby with dozens of guns. Imagine the scene: American soldiers digging trenches, cannons being positioned, British warships sitting offshore, two major powers preparing for the possibility of battle. And yet, something strange happened. Nobody fired. The British had orders to avoid an armed clash if possible. And American commanders didn't want to start a war either. So both sides just waited. This is where the story gets really strange. You might imagine the American and British soldiers sitting in their camps, staring angrily at each other. But that wasn't exactly what happened. The two sides actually developed surprisingly friendly relationships. Officers visited each other's camps. They attended social events. They sometimes drank together. British and American soldiers even interacted peacefully during their long occupation of the island. In other words, you had two armies facing each other. While their countries were technically on the edge of a major conflict, and the soldiers were basically getting along. Meanwhile, politicians and military leaders back home were becoming increasingly worried. They realized something ridiculous had happened. A dispute over a pig had turned into an international crisis. So the United States sent one of its most senior military leaders, General Winfield Scott. His job? Stop this thing before someone did something stupid. Winfield Scott arrived in the region in October 1859. He negotiated with British officials. And finally, both sides agreed to back away from the brink. Instead of fighting over the island, the Americans and British would jointly occupy it. The Americans would have a camp on one side. The British would have a camp on another. And they would wait until their governments could finally decide who actually owned the island. It sounds like the problem was solved, but it wasn't. Not even close, because the joint occupation lasted 12 years. Think about that. The original pig was killed in 1859, but the argument over the island continued for years. British Royal Marines established a camp on the northern part of San Juan Island in 1860. The Americans maintained their own military camp, and for years, both countries remained there. But there was no major battle, no invasion, no giant war, just Americans and British living on the same island while politicians tried to figure everything out. Eventually, the issue was sent to arbitration. In 1871, the United States and Great Britain agreed to let Kaiser Wilhelm I of Germany help settle the dispute. A commission examined the case, and on October 21st, 1872, the decision finally came. The San Juan Islands were awarded to the United States. The British withdrew. The American troops eventually left too. After more than a decade, the dispute was finally over. So, did a pig actually start a war? Technically, nope, there was never an actual war. No battle was fought between the American and British forces. The pig was the only casualty of the entire crisis. The real cause was much bigger. The United States and Great Britain were already arguing over who owned the San Juan Islands. The pig simply became the spark that turned a political dispute into a military standoff. So saying, "A pig started a war?" is funny, but the real story is even more interesting. One pig turned a border dispute into a situation involving soldiers, warships, cannons, and two of the world's most powerful countries. And somehow, everyone managed to walk away without starting a war. So the next time someone tells you history is boring, remember this. In 1859, a British pig wandered into an American farmer's garden. The farmer shot it. America and Britain nearly went to war. And then they spent 12 years peacefully arguing about who owned the island. All because of one very unlucky pig.